This is Booking It to Financial Freedom, show number 12.
Talking about money is not near as taboo as it is in American cultures.
I think our generation has a really hard time talking about money. I know 20-year-old me wasn't ever thinking about having a conversation with a significant other about what's our long-term goals, what should retirement look like. You know, that was nowhere on the radar.
Someone that's owning for 30 years versus renting, you are actually spending $200,000 more renting than you are if you had that house.
If you know that you're buying a property and you know it's not going to be your forever home, you can buy super consciously. Can it be a long-term rental? Is it eligible to be a short-term rental, and would it do well? Are there similar short-term rentals up on Airbnb right now? What kind of income could I see from this property?
It's literally a blueprint. Like, this is all you need, really, right? If you just follow exactly what he says, he even says in the book, you will be ahead of like 95% of the rest of the population.
Welcome to Booking It to Financial Freedom, where we explore literature from some of the most successful experts in their field to help you build a blueprint for personal growth and financial freedom. Join us as we examine a new book every month and break down key concepts to help you get out of the rat race and on track to start building a life better than you ever imagined. Hello, everyone. We have a great show lined up for you today as we had a chance to wrap up I Will Teach You to Be Rich. Amanda and I had a great interview with Alicia Finn. Alicia is a licensed real estate agent in both Colorado and North Carolina and specializes in helping those relocate between the two states. She is originally from the Midwest and was a paralegal for 14 years. In addition, Alicia has been on the consumer side of real estate since 2007, having bought and sold several homes and investments. Alicia currently lives in Pinehurst, North Carolina with her husband, their 2 sons, and 3 dogs. In her free time, she enjoys exploring her new home of North Carolina by hiking and running. And in the winter, you'll find her mat side cheering on her 2 sons at wrestling matches.
Hey, Alicia, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Alicia.
Hi, guys. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, we're really excited. I read a little bit about it in your bio, but you are a member of our team, our real estate team. You're actually our North Carolina branch out there in near Fort Bragg. What town do you live in?
We live in Pinehurst.
Pinehurst, yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, you were in Colorado for a while on our team. You're a realtor and an investor. You've got a couple investment properties here still in Colorado Springs, right?
Yep, 2.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you want to just kind of tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself and kind of how you started to get involved in real estate?
Yeah, of course. So I was a paralegal for 14 years. I just left that industry about 6 months ago to pursue real estate full time. One of the biggest reasons that I changed my careers was there was no room to grow as a paralegal. I could always negotiate my salary or switch law firms, but it was never going to be enough to be financially free unless I was also doing something else. So I got into real estate, absolutely loved it, and decided to do that full time.
Yeah. Well, we're happy that you decided that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
How did you kind of decide that real estate would be your asset class and the thing that you wanted to invest in?
So one thing that I really liked is having something physical that I can invest in, something that I can have eyes on, physically see and touch. It makes it feel more secure to me than some elusive stock that I own some portion of.
Sure.
But another thing that I really like about it is there's 2 parties that are benefiting from it. One, me and my family as the investor, you know, we own this piece of property, it's appreciating, it's growing in value and whatnot, and we're getting a little bit of cash flow. The second is our tenants. You know, they have this access to property that they either don't want to buy or can't buy for whatever reason, and they get a nice home to live in, and we get to provide that for them. So I really like that.
I love that too, because just so our listeners know, like all of us also are in the same circle of friends, I should say. So you were obviously friends with Boston and Logan, who we had on the podcast, and we had them on for Start With Why. And one of their big whys too was just being able to give back to the community. And I think that's really important as a real estate investor, because there's a lot of people that are out there just for the money. And obviously the money's great, but being able to provide a wonderful product to your renters is just another way to enhance your why.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the key to being a real estate. Well, one of the keys is not being a slumlord, right? You're giving a family something that's like, a nice product, like you said, for certain reasons, some maybe for credit reasons or whatever, a family might not be quite ready to go purchase their own property, but you give them a nice place to stay in the meantime while they do whatever it is they have to do to get into position to do so.
Yeah, or they simply just don't want to own real estate for whatever personal reasons they have. Maybe they move a lot, or it's not something that they're interested in. I mean, the author doesn't own a home.
Right.
I was gonna say, they listen to Ramit for their real estate adverse at this point.
That's funny. So kind of going along that topic, and I know you and I chatted about this a little bit the other day, but what do you feel is kind of one of your biggest takeaways from this book?
Oh gosh. So one of the things that I love most about this book is how analytical it is. It is literally a step-by-step guide on how to be financially literate. And I think that's very different from a lot of the books like Given Rich Dad Poor Dad. It's a great story and you get these nuggets of information on how to apply it. Whereas this is a step-by-step, just follow his instructions. Each instruction is broken down so simply. I think it's a great starting point for anybody trying to become more financially literate. Two of the biggest takeaways that I'm personally implementing in our lives is using credit cards. So my husband and I have a joint account that we use for all of our household stuff. Our mortgage payment, groceries, utilities, all of that come out of this one isolated account. And I've always used our debit card for everything, for our online utility payments, when I go grocery shopping, everything. And we each have our own personal credit cards that we love for the benefits, the cash back, the travel points, that type of stuff that we use day to day. We've just never used it for our household stuff.
Right.
So since reading the book, we've started using our favorite credit card to start earning those points and stuff. And now I'm just kicking myself like years worth of points that we just don't have, or didn't utilize or earned so that we could utilize them. So I think that's I'm very excited about that, to watch that kind of grow and see what benefit we can take away from that over the course of the next couple of years.
Yeah, and it goes back. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
That goes back to Ramit's strategy on the credit cards by going on the offense, right? And if you start delving into the credit card hacking as far as travel and stuff like that, one of the hard parts is to make sure that you're spending enough to get the rewards, because a lot of them have spending thresholds that you have to reach before you get the 50,000 or 75,000 bonus points, right? But what you want to do is you want to incorporate that spending on your credit cards on your daily expenses, as opposed to just going out and spending thousands of dollars just to get the points, right? You don't want to rack up useless debt. So
you don't want to spend money specifically just to earn these points, but if it's money that you're already spending every month, you know exactly how much is in your checking account, that you know you're going to pay this credit card off every single month, then it's a great tool. If you don't know how much you have in your, maybe don't do that route. But for us, we still swipe everything onto a debit card. So just switching that to credit, and now I have one more person to pay, which is the credit card company. It's super doable for us, and I think it'll really, we'll see the benefit pretty quickly just because of how high our bills are.
I love that.
But not going and finding more things to spend money on.
Right. Yeah. The benefit of using credit cards cannot be understated, I don't think, if you're a responsible spender, for sure.
I agree.
How do you, sorry, go ahead.
The second big takeaway that I loved from this book was switching the mindset around saving. I've always, every time that I've made up my budget, it's here are all of my expenses, here's all of my spending. And, the shopping or coffees, dining out, all that. And it's always been whatever's left over, that's the amount that I need to try to save every month. And I like how he shifts it where here are your expenses, your mortgage or rent, your utilities, and then here's your saving. And that goes above all of your spending, your coffee, dining out, shopping, whatever. And then whatever's left over after your expenses and savings, that's your guilt-free spending. You get to spend that however you want without thinking, oh, if I spend too much of this, I don't have any left over for savings. And I think that really shifts the mindset of, one, paying yourself first, and two, just it makes it a lot more fun to go on that shopping trip or go out to dinner, and you're not thinking about, I should be saving this money, because you already did that for the month. So I think it really prioritizes it, and it kind of it's just a new perspective that I think will really help me save more money.
Yeah. I know you're big on ensuring that your 2 teenage sons have like financial education, because obviously most of us are not getting that from school when we go through school. Can you kind of share some of the things that you do with your sons to teach them this? And maybe you've already shared with them some of the things you've learned in the book too.
Oh yeah, they love it. So they're currently reading this book. It's First to a Million by Dan Sheeks. Dan is a school teacher who lives in Colorado, and he wrote this book for the same reason that you just mentioned. There's not a lot of financial literacy taught in school. So it's geared towards young teenagers, and it's very simple, like, in this time frame, this is what you should be doing. In this time frame, these are the steps you should be making. And I think they've just started reading it, so we'll see what they think about it, but I think it's a great tool. One of the other things that we've done is I've actually added them as signers on one of my credit cards. My understanding on this is that they'll inherit a portion of my credit as they continue to use my credit card. And then once they're young adults, they have some established credit. It's not going to be enough to, go buy a house right away necessarily, but it's a good starting point. And it's kind of twofold, because it does teach them that this is not just free money. Mom has to pay it. But it's really convenient to be able to send my 16-year-old to the grocery store when we need like one ingredient for dinner.
Yeah.
Or like they'll go and get like, they're both wrestlers, and off season started, they needed new mouth guards. So a couple of nights ago, they took their cards, went to Dick's, and were able to go like pick out their mouth guards, pay for them. And I think it helps them be conscious, because it's not their money, it's not free money, and it kind of contains them that they're not going to go too crazy. How I'm sure a lot of us did when we got our first credit cards. Other than that, they both have Roth IRAs set up and traditional brokerage accounts. My older son is more interested in that type of investing. So he's asked a ton of questions. He's super motivated to see how much money he can get into those accounts super young, so that he can take advantage of compound interest long term. And honestly, Instagram has been kind of helpful, because his algorithm it's set up in a way, or it's been developed in a way or whatever, where he is constantly seeing financial tidbits like that.
Oh, I love that.
So yeah, so he's he sent me stuff on it, like if you have X amount of dollars in your Roth IRA by this age and you never contribute to it again, you're going to have this many millions at 65. So he sees that coming across, and it's not me telling him, it's the outside world that he's seen these little nuggets of information, and it's motivating him.
Right.
Which I think is phenomenal. So, I mean, it was really, we set up his Roth IRA about 2 years ago, and it was that time that he was seeing a lot of stuff on it on Instagram and was really asking a lot of questions like, how do we do this? Like, when do I get to pick my stocks? All this type of stuff. So I absolutely loved that. And other than that, it's just, we have a lot of conversations about money. I think we all kind of grew up in that generation that there weren't a lot of talks about money. You know, I never really saw my parents talk about money or talk about bills or anything like that. My dad did do a great job of when I needed to buy a car. I was 17. He took me to our local credit union, got a personal loan. He co-signed on it. And every loan came with a credit card at this place. So I was 17, I had a loan, and I had a credit card. And he did a great job of really explaining to me how credit cards work, how credit works, and the importance of building that credit. So that, I really benefited from that because, you know, my siblings didn't get that conversation. I don't think a lot of my peers got that conversation. And it made me a lot more conscious about credit and credit card usage super young.
Yeah.
And didn't you have a good credit score and were able to, because you bought a house really young, didn't you? Your first house?
Biggest financial mistake of my life was buying a house in 2007. Yeah, I was 18 or 19, but having the credit from that personal loan and the credit usage on my credit card, I did a great job of putting my gas, my eating out, that type of stuff on my card. And every time that I got paid, I paid off the credit card. I had also had my own cell phone for quite a few years at that point, that the account was under my name. So with those three things, I was able to obtain a loan at 18 or 19.
Yeah.
Right before.
Bad timing. It happens to everybody.
Bad timing.
What I loved to hear what you said is that fact that you are having these conversations with your sons, right? And it needs to happen more often across the American, culture. One of the things that I like that Ramit talks about in the book, he highlights the fact that he comes from an Indian culture where certain cultures, Indian culture specifically, and there's other cultures out there that talking about money is not near as taboo as it is in American culture. So it's one of those things that, what I think hopefully we're helping people with this podcast is to make them more comfortable to be able to actually talk about money and talk about finances and investing, especially with your family and educating your children. So it's an awesome thing to hear.
Yeah. I think it'll benefit them a lot long term, and just giving them the information, but also just making them more comfortable.
And it's exciting. It's exciting for me to hear how excited your son is about investing. Just to think about if he really delves into it and using the power of 72, exponential growth in the market, he could be a millionaire, and before he's 30. Yeah, absolutely. It's exciting.
It's so exciting, and he's gotten to the point that he's so comfortable. He got his first job this past year, and came home and was like, I need a budget. How do I make a budget? So we sat down and we made him a budget and stuff like that. And just his forethought to even come to me and be like, I know that I want to save money. I know that I want to save. He had 2 savings accounts set up that his check was going into his primary checking account. And then he had it funneling to 2 separate savings accounts. One was for like random stuff like bike repairs that he needs or saving up for a car or whatever. Another one was to buy his first house. So he's already thinking that long term.
Yeah.
And he was comfortable and confident enough that he went to the bank himself. I didn't go with him to open up a checking account. He went and opened up these accounts, sat there and talked to the teller, told her what he wanted, and was able to walk away with having these 3 accounts set up all on his own. And I was like, are you sure you don't want me to go with you? Like, let me come. He's like, if I don't know how to, like, at some point I need to learn how to do this, right?
Right.
And I was like, okay, like, go for it. So
do you require them to like make a monthly contribution to their IRA, or how do they handle funding their IRA?
So they had savings that were just sitting in our regular savings account, not earning anything. And that's what we used to initially fund those accounts.
Okay.
Right now, neither one of them are working because wrestling season takes precedence over everything in our house. So they haven't been doing anything with it yet. It's just sitting there kind of waiting for them.
Yeah, it's there whenever they're ready, or whenever you've got some extra cash.
And a cool thing through Fidelity is you can actually open up a, I think it's a regular brokerage account or it's a traditional Roth. I'm not sure which one. But you can set it up instead of the accounts that we have for them right now. They're under the Uniform Minors Act, or I can't remember the name of it, but essentially I own the accounts until they're 18 and they can take over, or 19 or something like that. Through Fidelity, you can actually open up an account for a minor that the minor has full control over it. So he can go in, he can link it to his bank account himself, he can make his deposits as he wants, and he can select what stocks he wants to buy. All with no oversight from me. Like, I can see his account on my portfolio, but I can't go in and like change it.
Yeah.
Which I think is really, you know, if you give them a small amount of money to kind of play with, and they can, you know, purchase an index fund or something and watch those numbers go up, I think that's really motivating.
Absolutely. Yeah, Robert Kiyosaki gives that example in Rich Dad Poor Dad, where a friend came to him and was like, my son needs a car. Should I just buy him a car?
Right.
Yeah. So instead he took, I think it was a couple $1,000s, gave it to his son and said, you have to invest this in the stock market and then, you know, make that money to buy a car. And the son actually ends up losing most of it, but now he's passionate about the stock market. He doesn't even care about having a car. All he cares about is educating himself about the stock market. So, amazing.
Yeah, I think it's great.
How do you guys, I'm curious, the both of you, like, how do you handle finances with your spouse? Do you both feel that, because that's something he brings up in the last chapter, is especially before you get married, obviously we're all married already. So, but just how important it is to discuss your finances and your goals, etc. Do you guys find it easy to chat with your spouse? Is like one of you the one that kind of controls the finances and the other one's just along for the ride? Like, Alicia, what do you guys do?
I handle most of our joint finances, but I think it's super important to have those conversations, because you can both be incredibly financially savvy. You guys can both be doing all of the right things and making great moves, but if you're working towards 2 completely different goals, it's going to be a lot harder to reach those goals, or one of you might fail. But if you have that conversation and you know these 2 goals are out there, you can develop a plan to work together to reach those in a way that you're working together, you're building together, and you're probably going to succeed a lot quicker than working independently. So I think it's super important. And again, kind of circling back, I think our generation has a really hard time talking about money and getting to where, like, I know 20-year-old me wasn't ever thinking about having a conversation with a significant other about what are we going to do with all of our money? Like, what's our long-term goal? What should retirement look like? You know, that was nowhere on the radar. So kind of playing catch up now and getting all those goals clearly defined and making a plan towards reaching them.
Right. I do like too that you guys have, because everyone does it a little bit different, but that you guys have separate accounts. Because Lindsay and I kind of started that way too. We'd have a joint account, and then we had our separate accounts so that like if I wanted to go buy a pair of Lululemon pants or something, I didn't have to like okay that with him. You know, there was just money in my account that I can use. We've kind of changed that a little bit just because so much we do is like intertwined, like we own businesses together, et cetera.
Right.
But really understanding what makes the couple comfortable. So
right. I've always loved the envelope style of like having different pockets of money for different stuff. And I think that's a big reason on why we set up our finances this way. Like we know that this account needs X amount of dollars every month to fund everything. And if we have some left over, great. We always have a buffer in there to make sure that we never like, oopsies, spent way too much at the grocery store with 2 teenage boys. But I like that this pocket is kind of self-contained. This is all of our necessities. Everything outside of that, like that's our guilt-free spending.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think you're going to ask me what Jen and I do. What we do is we basically use the inbox method. So all of our money filters to one centralized checking account. And then basically we push the money to our guilt-free. I have an account for my guilt-free spending, and she has her own account for her guilt-free spending. So we kind of combine efforts as far as the overall financial picture, and then just kind of push those down to those categories.
Yeah.
One thing that I did pick up, talking about the couple thing, I don't know where, I was probably a podcast or something a couple years ago, but what I like to do that Jen and I we haven't done it in a while, but we were for a little while, is basically we do quarterly money updates. So we specifically go out for dinner.
I love that.
With the sole purpose of discussing where we sit with our financial goals and all that good stuff. So that's one good tip for couples who are trying to realign themselves or whatever, that aren't necessarily, like you said, on the same goal, on the same path as far as where they want to go with their money. I would highly recommend doing something like that. Just go out, have a nice dinner, and with the sole purpose of reviewing your financial, where your financial health and where you set with your goals.
I think that's really a great idea.
It is, yeah. Okay, I want to transition to the topic that like all three of us are chomping at the bit to discuss.
I know.
And obviously, listeners, again, take this with a grain of salt because all three of us are real estate agents. We all invest in real estate, so we are a bit biased. But I think all three of us were not super happy with kind of the way that Ramit presents real estate in the last chapter. It just kind of appears that he adds a lot of kind of negativity to it and like fear mindset, which is funny because he kind of in the beginning of the book was like, so many people are fearful of the stock market, et cetera. But I feel like he does kind of the same thing with the real estate. But I think his primary point is that when you are buying your primary residence, you have to make sure that the numbers work for you. Because obviously, if you are paying $1,500 a month in rent and now you want to buy a primary and you just get, starstruck and you find this amazing house that's now going to cost you $3,000 a month, like that doesn't work either. You have to make sure that it works in your budget.
Right.
So, maybe starting with a starter home and you can always upgrade, et cetera. But there's just a lot of kind of misinformation, I feel, that he puts in the book.
I think he definitely misleads the readers. The example he uses of purchasing a home with a 30-year mortgage and the expenses tied to that are outrageously inflated, right? He's talking about $200,000 worth of repairs over 30 years on the example of 200,000 house?
A $220,000 house.
200. I mean, even if you completely replace the roof, the water heater, the heater, like everything that was, unless you're rebuilding the house under his example, it's like super crazy. And then one of the other things we were talking about before the podcast, as far as appreciation goes, he was using an example of 0.6. Well, that's highly subjective too, compared, whatever market you're in. What we were saying, like the average appreciation across the United States was actually 12% last year.
Yeah.
And I'll use an example of my house that I bought here in Monument. It's appreciated 45% over the last couple of years. So he he stretches the numbers where it's convenient. He uses low ball numbers where, like, you know, that's the part that really kind of drove me crazy in his example for the house stuff.
Yeah.
So I have a super interesting stat to share with you guys. The CaseShiller, this is all according to CaseShiller Index from 1941 to 2022. So the past 81 years, home values appreciated 73 of those years. They depreciated 7 years and stayed the same 1 year. Of the 7 years of depreciation, 5 were from 2007 to 2011 when the housing market crashed, which had little to do with housing and had a lot to do with lending practices at the time. Case in point, I should not have been qualified for a mortgage at 18 or 19 using my cell phone bill as proof that I can pay a bill.
Yes.
But I thought that's super interesting. Like, what other, the stock market has similar, you know, over long periods of time like that it does continue to appreciate. And if the stock market in his eyes is super safe, you know, he encourages you to really max out your Roth IRA, your 401k if you have a match. How is this more of a risk? And I do think he makes some good points with, you know, he recommended staying in a house or buying a house if you're going to stay there for at least 10 years. And I think that's a good point on some level. If you want to buy real estate, you should not necessarily buy and then sell real estate every couple of years. If you're somebody that has to move, like for the military, that may not be the smartest approach to it. However, if you know that you're buying a property and you know it's not going to be your forever home, you can buy super consciously. Have your realtor pull rental comps for that home. Can it be a long-term rental? Is it eligible to be a short-term rental, and would it do well? Are there similar short-term rentals up on Airbnb right now that you can kind of project what kind of income could I see from this property? And if the numbers work, factoring in a property manager, then it's not a bad investment if you're going to keep it or buy it and then keep it. You know, the house that we live in now, we know that we're not going to be in Pinehurst, North Carolina forever. And we bought it specifically because we think it would make a good long-term rental. That was a big deciding factor when we purchased this home. And I think the next couple of homes that we purchase, we're going to have that same mindset when we go to look at properties. Can this be an investment long-term for us?
Yeah.
It's all about buying smartly, right? I had an uncle who had a long military career, and all he did was buy a new home every time he had to change duty stations. And when he retired, obviously he had his military retirement, but his real estate portfolio made him a millionaire as well. So it's all about making smart purchases. I think one of the things that he kind of leaned for, and you kind of touched on this, is basically, I think human nature is to go out and buy the most extravagant house they can possibly afford. And then people are not educated, we're not going to say educated enough, but they're not accounting for like their escrow going up because taxes have been raised, or, you know, unforeseen expenses like the HVAC system breaking down, stuff like that. So I think that might be part of the reason why he's steering people away.
Yeah, and it's same what Robert Kiyosaki does too. The same thing of like, don't think of your house as an asset, because a lot of people, the way they spending, keeping up with the Joneses, and then they need all this new furniture, et cetera, it becomes a liability, but it's about doing it smartly.
Yeah, and I made that mistake. The second house that I bought, you know, I was approved for X amount of dollars. That's the range that we were looking at. And I ended up buying a house that was a little over 2,000 square feet for a small family that did not need that at all. And in hindsight, you know, I didn't factor in maintenance costs. It was a slightly older home. It had been bank owned and the bank flipped it. So it looked really nice, but there was a lot of small hidden things that were wrong with it.
Right.
You know, I didn't account for utilities in a big open house. I didn't account for, you know, like lawn maintenance and stuff like that. It was just, here is the dollar amount that you're going to pay instead of rent. And it made sense. And hindsight, I wish I would have bought something a lot smaller that was newer. And I think that would have, I think I would have saved a lot of money, and probably when I turned around and sold it years later, probably would have made more money.
Right.
But at least your mindset was correct as far as like trying to buy. It's just about educating yourself, right? And speaking of rent, I can't let this go.
Yeah, I was going to make the same point.
He talks about, there was one specific part, I think it was in the next to last chapter in the book. He talks about if you rent as opposed to buying, like when you rent, you don't pay taxes and you don't pay for the repairs and all that stuff. And sitting here from an investment standpoint, I'm telling you, if anybody out there who is renting and they think that they're not paying taxes, if they're not paying that landlord's taxes, insurance, vacancy rate, repairs for the house, you're out of your mind, because any smart real estate investor has taken all of that into account, and you are paying for that, I promise.
Yes.
So it's like, why wouldn't you buy smartly within your means and then basically have an asset that's going to appreciate for you over the years, as opposed to paying your landlord's expenses.
Right.
And to that point,
Amanda, I think, go ahead. I think that you made the point earlier that he kind of implies that rent is somehow cheaper than all of these expenses, or that you're, whether you rent or own a home, your out of pocket renting is less. And that's simply not true, because why would we own real estate for investment? Why would anybody be a landlord if they're not making enough to cover those expenses, right?
Yeah, he did try to paint the picture in the book that a lot of landlords are operating at a loss. Like, that's not a very smart landlord. Like, if any savvy real estate investor, all of those expenses are covered. So and rents go up with the market.
It might not be a huge cash flow. You know, I know for one of our properties, like, we're making a couple $100s off of it, but the cash flow isn't why we've kept it. It's the appreciation. That, you know, 7%, 40% over a couple of years, that's why we've kept it.
So I actually did some of my own math, because when he was giving some of those figures of how much that $220,000 house is going to cost you after 30 years, I'm like, I can't let this go. So first of all, he doesn't take into account that rents go up every year. And currently the national average is above 3% a year that rents are going up. So if I locked in a mortgage 30 years ago, I'm probably paying $800 a month, if that, depending what I bought the house for. But if I'm renting 30 years later, there's no way that I'm paying $800 for rent for an equal house. You know what I mean? So he's not taking into account that rents go up every year, but when you buy a house, you're locked in at that monthly amount. So when I did my math, and I'll see if I can include this in the podcast show notes, but basically, you know, he had talked about that $200,000 in major repairs or improvements. If that's the case, and you've put $200,000 into your house, then you need to include that in the value of the house, because that has now increased the value of your house. So taking that into account, someone that's owning for 30 years versus renting, you are actually spending $200,000 more renting than you are if you had that house. So one of his main points is, don't wrap all your money into your primary residence, because you need that money for investing. But to kind of disprove what he's saying, well, now I've had $200,000 less over 30 years to invest in other things. You know, if I would have owned my home, I would have had that money. So I just, you know, had to make that point, because if it's purely about math, then the math works in our favor. If you're smart about it.
I think it's a great point. I do agree that, you know, your primary home is not an asset until it's not your primary home, though.
Right.
If you're buying it, knowing it's not going to be your forever home, knowing, you know, doing the legwork up front or doing the math up front and figuring out this could be a good rental, or even just half chancing into it when you're ready to move and somebody's saying, hey, why don't you keep it and rent it? Then it becomes an asset. And, you know, it's, again, as long as the numbers work, if you can rent it for more than, your mortgage and your property manager and your insurance and taxes and all of that cost, which you usually can, especially if you've owned it for a few years, then it's not an asset, or it's not a liability anymore. It becomes an asset.
And there's so many ways you can turn your primary into an asset if you need it to be. You can rent out a room if you have a separate entrance in your basement. If you travel a lot, you can rent it as a furnished short-term rental. I can let it appreciate for a few years, like Jamie. I know he's got a lot of equity in his house that he could tap into to buy an investment, make money off of that. Like there's a lot you can do to make your primary work as an asset for you. You just have to be creative.
I agree.
Yeah, cool. Is there anything either one of you wanted to bring up about the book that we haven't talked about?
I think I got everything off my chest.
Right.
By and large, I think it's a great book I think it's a great first book. I think it really, again, it's a step-by-step that teaches you the very basics and puts you in a great spot to take that next step. Yeah. Whether it's buying real estate or investing in some kind of business or something else. There's so many different ways to invest. It's not just real estate and it's not just the stock market. But I think it really, if you're somebody who's incurred a lot of credit card debt or just haven't made great financial choices, I think it's a great way to clean the slate and start over and start building. And the advice and the tools in the book are just incredible for that.
Yeah, I agree.
And then move on.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I don't want to finish this book on a bad note.
Sure. It was
like
great.
I absolutely love this book. And to your point that you said earlier, Alicia, it's literally a blueprint. Like this is all you need, really. Right? If you just follow exactly what he says, you will. And then I think he even says in the book, you will be ahead of like 95% of the rest of the population. Yeah. And I believe that too. That's why I love this book. I would advise, recommend anyone to read it. And if you could get to the point where you're at, where he will guide you in his 6-step plan? Was it 6 steps?
I think so.
Or whatever.
I think so.
Like if you just follow through with what he says, you're going to be well on your way to being wealthy. And like you said, then once you got all of that foundation under you, then you can start looking at that point, you're going to want to start buying different assets or whatever. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, blueprint straight off, out of the gate, you can't go wrong with this.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that, calling it like a foundation builder. I think that's great. You set this super sturdy, you have some financial literacy, and then you can build on top of that. I think it's a great, again, first step book to really building that financial literacy for yourself.
Absolutely.
And that's why we chose this book early on in this podcast journey.
Yeah, cool. Well, as the podcast goes on, we'll build upon this knowledge to take it to the next level if people are ready. So Well, I just want to thank you again, Alicia, for being a guest. If anyone has any real estate needs in North Carolina, Alicia would love to help you, especially if you are interested in getting involved in investing. She's a specialist in that, so she can definitely help you. So thanks again.
All of those people going to Fort Bragg, look her up.
Yeah, or if
yes, please.
In the military.
If you're PCSing here or out of here, I would love to meet up with you.
Yeah, sounds good. Awesome. Well, thanks again.
Thank you guys both for having me.
Yep. Bye.
Thanks everybody for joining us today. It was a great interview with Alicia. And if you liked what you heard today, please help us grow the channel by leaving us a rating and review. If you're watching us on YouTube, like, subscribe, set up the notification bell, and we will see you for the next episode.